Hey, Steve Stine from the Guitar Zoom Academy here, and today we're going to be talking about why guitar players wind up having a plateau and what we can do to try and break through that. So first thing we need to do is as a guitar player, kind of define what that means to us. What is a plateau? Oftentimes it means that we're practicing regularly, but we're just not seeing the improvement that we'd like to. Now, why does this happen? Well, there's all sorts of different reasons. The first thing we're going to talk about is lack of structure. Okay, sometimes what happens is, you've been learning random things, YouTube videos or whatever it might be, and you might, connect with something, but in the bigger picture, you're not making the progress that you want. And so, randomizing all of these different things, what I try and remind people to do is, if you really want to make forward motion with your playing, there's a few things that we can look at, but one of them is thinking about what your foundation is, what is it that you really want to try and achieve, and then being very careful of all of the other stuff. So let's take a very simple example. Let's say, for instance, your goal was to learn how to connect chords better. Okay, so you're trying to play G and C and E minor and D, or a bar chord or something like that. And you're struggling with elements of this. You're struggling with moving from G to the bar chord, or you're struggling with the bar chord itself, or C is difficult for you to play. So you already have ideas in your head of what needs to be done to be able to achieve this foundation of playing these chords and playing the song or songs that you want to be able to do. But you find yourself then practicing tapping or something like that, or you're learning triads on your guitar or something. Now, again, I'm not saying that any of that is bad. It all has to do with how much time you have, whether or not these different kind of levels of study are completely disconnected, or whether there's some sort of connection between them, and then whether or not you have enough availability in your brain in terms of space to be able to do all of these different things. Again, if you're practicing and you're loving what you're doing and everything's feeling good, who am I to say that you're doing anything right or wrong? If it's working for you, that's great. The reason why you're probably, hearing this right now is because maybe things aren't great. Maybe you are kind of lost and you're not really sure what to do, and you do feel like you're on a plateau and you're not really getting anywhere. That's where the problem is, you see? So you have to be a little bit careful with how much stuff you're trying to do and whether or not the things that you're trying to do are connected in some way that can benefit each other. So if you're trying to learn how to play these chords, and then all of a sudden you're working on, Eddie Van Halen tapping, it might be motivating for you, but hopefully you can understand that there's a vast disconnect between what's happening with your chords and your strumming and all that kind of stuff, and the fact that you're trying to learn how to tap. Oftentimes this happens too because there's such a disconnect in your ability at that point. If I'm talking to somebody who's been playing guitar for 2 months or 3 months, and all of a sudden our conversation goes to, string tapping or something like that, they might not be technically ready for that, not only, mentally ready for whatever that is. They don't know scales. None of this is going to make sense. The technique or the art of the actual tap isn't something that they've developed yet. They're still trying to learn how to strum. So just think about that a little bit. So common causes of plateau, one is the lack of structure. Okay, we're all over the place. The next thing is ineffective repetition. Okay, we practice the same things over and over and over, but we're not improving, for instance, on the specifics of it. So we might be practicing, again, this G chord or something like that, or this bar chord, but we're not really paying attention to the specifics and the struggles that we're having and how to improve those. So we're going through the motion, but we're not really paying attention to the detail. So let's say you were practicing a riff of some sort, some song that you like. You're working through it, but think about what goes into that. There's the visualization and the memorization of what you're trying to do, and then there's the execution of what you're trying to do, the picking, the action of the pick, whether it's down picking, alternate picking, changing strings, whatever it might be. And then there's the fingers needed to be able to play the riff. And then there's timing, right? There's tone. There's all of these different kinds of things. There's dynamics. So, sometimes we just see the obvious. Okay, here's this riff and, it goes 2, 4, 5 or something like that. Okay, so we memorize that. We've got that down. But then we need to work on the execution, and then we need to work on the quality of what we're doing as well. So learning how to kind of deep dive into it with a focused mind. So this is something else that I try and get people to understand too, is when you do practice with intention and practice with focus. Don't just haphazardly practice with the TV on and the phone's ringing and, you're making something to eat and then you've got an extra 5 minutes to try and fit in there while you're watching the news. If it's something that's automated that again, a practice element that you're just doing a warm up of some sort that doesn't require all that thought, hey, that's great. But if right now what you need to do is be practicing something to try and develop it to get out of this plateau that you feel like you're on, you need to focus. It's not always about how much time you spend, although that, again, the balance of how much brain space you have available versus how much time you have and how many things you're going to attack, that's kind of the main section there. But even if you only had 5 or 10 minutes, you could still make progress by really learning how to focus on whatever it is that you're trying to develop. The other problem I see is that, oftentimes there's no feedback. You don't know whether or not what you're doing is working, right? Or you need someone to tell you, hey, you're missing this, or if you tried this a little bit differently, it might be easier for you. Or, as I'm watching you play, I'm seeing that, your arm is bent this way, and maybe if you try to do this, or, as I watch you play that riff, I'm seeing that you're down picking, you're struggling with your down picking, or whatever it might be. So assessment is really important. When you don't have any feedback, it's hard to know whether what you're doing is actually working for you. And the other thing I would mention too is the comfort zone trap. You keep playing what you're already good at, okay? So you're not really trying to expand the palette, you're just staying in that comfort zone. And I find this a lot when it comes to scales, for instance. Maybe the pentatonic, and again, the pentatonic is an amazing scale and there's a million things we can do with it. But sometimes what happens is somebody develops, the first position of the pentatonic scale or a couple of positions and then that's it. Or they memorize the notes on their 6th string, but then they never bothered to memorize any other notes. You find that kind of halfway point where you've learned something that's kind of useful or very useful for that matter, but then you're not really wanting to expand that because you've already felt what it's like to actually have to spend the time to develop that. If that kind of makes sense, that's what we do. Now, how do we break through this? Well, there's a couple of different things we can do. Number one, we can define a clear outcome. For instance, a goal. I want to be able to whatever. Now, oftentimes I hear people say, I just want to get better at guitar. I want to be a holistic guitar player. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. For some people, that works really well. But for other people, it's easier to define something specific. I want to learn to play my songs faster, more accurately, cleaner, whatever we want to say about those things. But that's what I want to be able to do. I want to learn how to do that. Or I want to learn how to improvise melodically. So when I play, it doesn't just sound like I'm playing through a scale. Or I want to develop more understanding of my fretboard, the scales, the chords, arpeggios, all of those things that are happening on my fretboard. I want to learn to visualize those better and understand the theory behind them. There's a lot of different things. So the next thing is developing a focused plan that works into this goal, developing a path, or a roadmap, if you will, to try and develop into this goal or these goals that we have. The other thing I think that helps with a breakthrough is as I said before, assessment. Okay, looking for someone to hold you accountable, looking for insight, those aha moments that you can have when you're actually talking to somebody. I've always told people, if you want to get really good at darts or you want to get really good at pool, the easiest thing to do is find some friends that are really good at pool and hang out with them and play with them. And you might not be certainly the best pool player right now, but you're going to learn a lot by hanging out with other pool players versus just, reading a book on how to play pool or watching a video on how to play pool. Again, those can be very, very valuable. There's no doubt about it. But if you're actually hanging out with somebody and you can interact with them and you can ask them questions and they can respond and you go, oh, I never thought about it that way, you can get a lot. There's a lot of aha moments that can happen from that. And just, bottom line, stay open to change. Okay, plateaus often mean it's time for you to evolve in your practice. If you start feeling like things are kind of stuck, you have to reflect and see what you're doing, see what you need. Again, think about your foundation, trim the fat if you need, because again, the foundation versus all this other stuff out here is dependent on how much time you have to practice. Again, if you have 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you might not have time for all these other things. But overall, the more you can make these things and this fit together, the more progress you can make. Certainly when you practice, make sure that you're focused and try and find, some way of having communication. So just remember, if, we here at the Guitar Zoom Academy, that's what this whole thing is about, is building you a game plan, a roadmap. So you understand a practice routine of what it is that you're supposed to be working on, weekly assessments of your playing, and then just being available, literally on a daily basis to be able to have conversations with you to give you clarity and understanding and then get you right back to work. Bottom line is that nothing happens unless you're you're working on it, right? There's no magic pill here. You have to do the work. The difference is if you don't know what to be doing, it can be a struggle. And the other part is if you don't know how to get out of the mud, if you don't know how to get unstuck, that's where we get into a plateau and we get confused. So being able to have conversations with people, you and I sit down and we actually talk about something, and you tell me what's going on or you show me what's going on, that's how we get you out of there. So anyway, take care, stay positive, and be sure to check out Guitar Zoom Academy, all right?